Hello and welcome to the 4th grade channel of Sun Devil Learning Labs. I am Mrs. Khan and let's get started. Alright, so today's lesson, our topic for today is continuing with context clues, but we're going to look at inferences, alright? First though, we're going to do a little bit of a warm-up to get our brains going, right? To really think about what inferences are. And we're going to do that with a read aloud of Pancakes for Breakfast by Tommy DePaula. It's published by Fulton Harcourt Publishing Company. All right, so what I want you to do is listen and think, just like we've done before, all right? I want you to follow along with the story and think about, without words, how do I know what is happening? All right? Think of that. Think about that and ask that of yourself, right? So let's continue on with the story. Right, here is our cover. Our title is Pancakes for Breakfast by Tommy DePaula. Right. Here is our inside cover. Has our title, Pancakes for Breakfast. Our title page, title is Pancakes for Breakfast by Tommy DePaula, and it's published by Harcourt Children's Books, Fulton Mifflin Harcourt, right? Our dedication says, for Betty Cave. Right, so let's start with the story. It was a cold winter morning and the sun was just coming up. Joan awoke in her bed, snuggled up and warm, her cat at her feet. She could hear her dog stretching on the floor. And as she got ready for the day, washing her hands and her face, all she could think about was pancakes for breakfast. As she got ready to make her breakfast, that's all she thought about. She put on her apron, thinking about pancakes. She pulled out her recipe book, thinking about pancakes. And when she opened her recipe book, she turned to her recipe for pancakes. And if we read, our pancake recipe says 2 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 3 tablespoons of butter melted, 9 tablespoons of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, 3 eggs, 2 cups of milk. And the directions say, sift all dry ingredients into a bowl, beat eggs lightly, pour eggs and milk into the flour mix. Mix with a large spoon, only long enough to blend. Batter should be lumpy. Stir in the melted butter. Cook on a hot griddle. All right. Continuing on. She, as usual, read her recipe before continuing with her process. Thinking about her pancakes, she pulled out her mixing bowl and her sifter, and then she got her ingredients ready. She got out her flour, her baking powder, and she put those in her bowl. The next ingredient that she was supposed to use were eggs. She went to the cupboard to find them, and there were none left. So out to her chicken coop she went. Out in the snow, all bundled up, she gathered her eggs. Upon returning to her cooking, she went to look for her next ingredient, which was milk. And what she found was an empty pitcher. So off she went again, out into the cold to milk her cow. After filling her bucket, she went back inside, put her milk in her milk pitcher, and poured what she needed into a measuring bowl. And using that milk in her measuring bowl, she churned her butter. She churned and churned and churned. She churned and churned. For a long time that morning, she churned until she was sad. But her hard work paid off. She had her butter. She put it in her butter dish. And in anticipation of her pancakes, she went to the cupboard for her maple syrup, only to find that her bottle was empty. So off she went out into the cold to her neighbor who sold maple syrup. Happy with her prize, she thought about all of the things that she was going to do that morning before having her pancakes for breakfast. But her happy thoughts were interrupted when she opened her door. She found that her cat and her dog had gotten into all of her ingredients for her pancakes for breakfast. Sad and defeated, her dreams of pancakes flew away until she noticed a smell coming from out the door. She raced out the door into the cold morning, following the smell to her neighbor's house. Arriving at her neighbor's house, she arrived at her neighbor's house just in time to invite herself to breakfast, a breakfast of pancakes. Full and satisfied, she had a nice nap at home. Right? That's the end of our story. All right, so your task was to listen and think, right? You followed along with the story. And did you ask yourself, without words, right? You noticed there weren't any words to tell us the story. How do we know what is happening? What do you think? All right. And to add to that, I want you to go back to the story. All right. I want you to look at the pictures, but turn off your volume. All right. I want you to do it without sound and come up with your own story. Is your story the same as mine? Did you think of something different? And think about what you see in the pictures that made you tell the story that you do. All right? All right, so let's continue on. Today's objective, right? We're going to continue on with our lesson. Our objective today is I can determine the meaning of words and phrases within a text using my knowledge of inferences. All right? We're going to focus on inferences. So let's review what we went over this week. All right? You went over some things with Miss Holman and you went over some things with me, right? All right, so we've been talking about context clues, right? And context clues are words or groups of words that give clues about the meaning of an unknown word, right? And context clues can be used in a sentence or a paragraph to determine the meaning of an unknown word in any type of reading passage. So when you think about it, as readers, we use context clues to determine the meaning of an unknown word, right? And remember that context clues are pieces of information in a text that helps readers understand words and details, right? So if we pull that apart, context is the text around a word, and the clues are the pieces of information that help us understand something, right? All right, so with context clues, there are different types, right? We've already gone over a few of them. And when we think of those different types, we remember the word ideas, right? I-D-E-A-S, right? I is for inference, D is for definition, E is for example, A is for antonym, and S is for synonym. We have already, this week, gone over D, E, A, and S, right? So today we're going to go over inference, which is the meaning is not given, so you must use the text clues, right? All right, so that brings us to our topic for today, right? We are going to talk about inferences. And in inference, when using inference as context clues, the meaning of a text is not given and the reader must use clues, right? So the reader must use their skills to look for clues within a sentence or a passage to identify the meaning of the text, right? So readers must use reasoning and prior knowledge or schema, right? When you hear me say schema, try to remember that means prior knowledge or your background knowledge, all right? And this context clue, which is inference, is often a little bit harder for a reader to spot, and that's okay, all right? If you struggle with this, that's okay, all right? So let's look at this awesome picture, all right? This is the basis of a bookmark I want you to make, all right? If you worked with me before on another lesson, we made this, all right? If you want, you can draw it on the top of your paper, or you can make a bookmark, which is what I'm gonna do, all right? So let's make our bookmark, all right? I have a piece of paper, all right? You can do just a strip of a piece of paper. You can use a scrap piece of paper. You can put it at the top of your page, whatever you feel like, all right? I'm gonna use this one. It's a little bit big, but that's okay because for me to show you, it'll be a little easier to see, right? All right, so first thing I'm gonna do, just like that picture, if you wanna go back to it, I'm going to draw my 3 puzzle pieces, all right? And we will go back over it. So I have my 3 puzzle pieces. My title is Making Inferences, right? So this is what I have, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to think about the steps to making an inference, all right? So our first step when we're reading is we look for our clues, all right? And the image that I'm going to put in mine is a magnifying glass because it's kind of easy. It's kind of a circle, right? With a little bit of a stick at the end and a circle in the middle, right? So it looks like that. Right, so that is our looking for clues, right? Our second step is to activate our prior knowledge. What do we know that we can put together with this clue, right? So I'm going to put a thought bubble, kind of like in a cartoon, right? It looks like a cloud. So there we are. And when we put those 2 things together, we should be able to come up with an inference. So I am going to draw for my inference a light bulb because that's kind of like an idea, right? All right, so there's mine, right? And on the bottom, I am going to put, and underneath my magnifying glass, my looking for my clues, I'm going to write read, right? Because that's what we do. We read and look for our clues, and that gets added to are thinking about what we already know. So I'm going to write think. That's our cloud or thought bubble. And that should lead us to, kind of like an equation, our inference, right? If you want, you can color it in. I'm gonna color in mine just really quickly. Right? My light bulb is yellow. My thought bubble is blue, just because I feel like it. And my magnifying glass is purple. All right. I am not incredibly artistic, but here is what I have, right? So we have our first part. We read and we look for our clues. And then we think about what we know, our background knowledge, our prior knowledge, our schema, right? And then putting those two things together, we should come up with our inference or our idea of what wasn't said, right? So here's that image again. If you want to hit pause, make yours, right? You can even draw what I have here. I'm not artistic in that way. I can't draw a brain. That's a little too hard for me. And remember, just like I have here, right? Our inference process is like an equation and a puzzle, right? We read and look for clues in the text. And then we think about what we know or our schema, our background knowledge, our prior knowledge, right? And when we put those together, we have our inference, and it's what makes sense, right? All right, so go ahead and hit pause, finish drawing that out. Let's continue on. So when we think about inferencing, right, when we think about making an inference, think of an inference as an educated guess, all right? Because we're using clues from the text and we're not making random guesses, right? When you think back to our pancakes for breakfast, we wouldn't say anything about a bird or waffles or fruit, right? Because there wasn't anything in the pictures that led us to those ideas, right? All right, so also when we're thinking about inferencing, sometimes there can be more than one answer, right? My story maybe wasn't the same as yours, right? As long as you can justify your answer using the text, it's going to be a viable inference, right? And lastly, making inferences is not just about what the character is doing, right? An inference might involve answering questions such as, what character traits does this person exhibit? Or where is this person? When did this event occur? How did this event happen? How does this person feel? Who is this paragraph about? Right? If you go back and look at the story, you'll notice that when our character is churning butter, there's a clock in the background, right? It shows when she started churning and when she finished churning. And if you look at our last picture, when she's at the neighbor's house, it shows the time again. And if you're good with an analog clock without any numbers, you can estimate a lot of time has passed, right? So that tells us that she's had a long morning, right? That's an inference. All right, so think about this, all right? Have you ever solved a riddle? If you have, surprise, you made an inference to solve that riddle. Did you know that? So as an example, all right, I am black and white and red all over, right? What am I? The answer is I am a newspaper, right? And we know that because the word red is spelled R-E-A-D instead of R-E-D. That's the best clue, right? Yes, it talks about black and white, the colors, and you assume just hearing it, you're still talking about the color red. But as you read it, right, it's a totally different word. That's using your inference skills to solve the riddle, right? All right, so let's think about pulling apart an inference, right? How do we do it? This is something that you do naturally, and that's perfectly fine, right? But I want you to understand our steps, right? So the first step in making an inference is we read the text and find our evidence. We ask ourselves, what is the author saying, all right? And then our second step is we activate our schema, our prior knowledge, right? And we ask ourselves, what do I know that helps me connect my knowledge with the text? All right. And then our third step is we make an inference, right? We ask ourselves, what logical conclusion can I make based on the text and my schema, right? What makes sense? Looking at my clues and my background knowledge. When I put those together, what makes sense? And when we answer that question, we use phrases like, I infer that. This could mean, I think that. I predict that. Maybe, right? And lastly, why do we do this? Inferences help you understand the text more fully, right? That makes sense. All right, so thinking about making inferences, right? There are certain questions that you're usually asked, all right? You'll read something and then maybe I'll ask you some questions, or you'll read something and your next teacher will ask you questions, right? Or maybe you practice that at home with whoever is there, your parents, your aunt, your uncle, your cousins, right? So we have 4 question types. Our first one is right there. And that is when the answer is right there in the story, right? If I asked you about pancakes for breakfast and I said, does our main character have any pets? Right? The answer is right there in the picture. She has a cat and a dog. All right? And the key words when we're reading a text, right? Our book didn't have any words, and I did that on purpose. When we come across a question that is a right there question, the key words that we'll find are who, what, when, where, how many, and does, right? All of those questions can be answered by looking at your text. Our second one is think and search, right? That is when the answer is in the story, but you have to piece it together, all right? That's like me asking, how long did our main character in Pancakes for Breakfast have to wait to have her pancakes, right? We would have to look at our first page. The sun was just coming up, right? And then we can also look at those clocks that I mentioned, right? So when we come across a think and search question, we'll find the keywords that are find an example, or summarize, or compare and contrast, or how did, or retell, right? Our third type of question is author and you, right? That is when you use your schema, your prior knowledge, your background knowledge, what you know, and the text, your clues, right, to make an inference. These are the ones that we're looking for, right? And the questions that you'll look for are things like, why do you think? Or make a prediction? Or what is the main idea? Right? Or what is the author's purpose? Or suggest another title. Why did the author write? All right? And our last type of question is an on your own question. And that's when you just use your schema, right? You use your background knowledge, your prior knowledge, what you know, and you answer what's your opinion. All right. And when you know that this is the type of question that you're looking at, it'll usually ask, how would you feel if, or what would you do if, or have you ever, right? If you think back to our pancakes for breakfast story, right? And I asked you, what would you do if the same thing happened to you with the cat and the dog getting into the ingredients, right? You're not using anything from the story to give your answer, right? You're just using your background knowledge and sharing your opinion, right? If you also notice, each of these question types is a specific color. And I did that because when we practice this and when you do it on your own, I have it coordinated so that the questions that are asked are colored in the same color of the question type listed here. All right. Just as a little clue of what you're going to be doing. All right. So let's try to make an inference. All right. Remember to use your bookmark. All right. So all right, let's read this passage and then we will look at some questions to answer, all right? Here's our passage. We weren't even there yet, and I could already feel the buttery popcorn melting in my mouth. I hope we get there in time to get some good seats, my mom called from the front. I didn't even care about the seats. I just wanted to eat as much popcorn as possible. We arrived just in time for the previews, and I was in hog heaven munching on popcorn for the next 2 hours. All right, if you want to hit pause and reread that, go ahead and do that. Let's continue. All right, so we look for our clues, and then we think about our schema, our background knowledge, what we already know, and then we make our inference, what makes sense, right? So the clues that I found in this passage were popcorn, good seats, previews, 2 hours, and his mom saying, I hope we get there in time. And also, my mom called from the front, right? Those are clues, at least for me, that will add to what I already know, right? Maybe you already thought about what it is and you have your inference, but I want you to be able to pull this apart, all right? So my schema, my background knowledge, what I already know that I can add to this is when I put together popcorn, good seats, previews, and 2 hours, that makes me think of going to the movies, right? And then when I think about in time and from the front, right? I hope we get there in time. And my mom called from the front. That tells me that they're in a car, right? They're on their way to probably the movies because that was our first schema part, right? So when we put all of this together, my inference, what makes sense, is the characters in the car with their mom on the way to the movie theater, right? And then in the end, they actually do get there, right? Does that make sense? All right, so let's make an inference, all right? I want you to think about these questions. We're going to look at the passage again. Think about the questions and try to answer them, all right? So, where was this family going? What seats were they referring to, right? We kind of already answered that with our bookmark. Do you think this is the first time that this family has done this activity? How do you know? And decide on one more clue that could help the reader understand what was happening, all right? So let's look at the passage again. We weren't even there yet, and I could already feel the buttery popcorn melting in my mouth. I hope we get there in time to get some good seats, my mom called from the front. I didn't even care about the seats. I just wanted to eat as much popcorn as possible. We arrived just in time for the previews, and I was in hog heaven munching on popcorn for the next 2 hours. All right, so think about these questions. Go back and read the passage if you want to, right? What do you think, right? So where was this family going? What seats were they referring to, right? We kind of answered that when we went through our inference process using a bookmark, right? So where was this family going? What seats were they referring to, right? That's our first question. Our second question is, do you think this is the first time that this family has done this activity? How do you know? And our last question, decide on one more clue that could help the reader understand what was happening. All right? Go ahead and hit pause and try to answer those questions. All right, so let's look at the answers that I found. All right? I have the characters were on their way to the movies, right? So they were referring to the seats in the movie theater, right? For the second question, I don't think this is the first time they're going to the movies. And I know this, right? The part of the passage that tells me that is because the character talks about eating popcorn for 2 hours. So the character knows that there's popcorn. That's what he's looking forward to, right? And he can do it for 2 hours. So he already knows that he'll be there for that long, right? And then our last question, the last answer that I have, is an additional clue that I think would help the reader know what's going on is I think having an extra clue of in a big dark room at the end of the scenario would help the reader, right? Does that make sense? All right, so I want you to try it, all right? Choose one passage from each set to infer, all right? Make your inference one from each side, okay? So you have 2 passages here. Pick one to make your inference, all right? Your first one reads, my mom went to the store. She bought cough drops, hot tea, and a box of tissues. Why? Right? Your second passage says, I woke up Saturday morning and looked out my window. It was sunny and hot. I ran downstairs. My dad said, don't forget your towel. Where was I going? Right? Hit pause and decide what your inference is. How are you going to answer that question? All right? Hit pause now. All right, so let's look at the answers to those ones, all right? If you chose the first passage, the answer was someone was sick or had a cold, right? My prior knowledge that told me that was cough drops, hot tea, and a box of tissues are usually used when someone is sick or not feeling good, right? Our second passage, if that's the one you chose, our character was going to the pool or going swimming, right? Because our clues from that one was it was sunny and hot, it was a weekend, and his dad said, don't forget your towel, right? It makes sense that our character would be going swimming or going to a pool, right? All right, so let's look at our second set, all right? Pick one of these passages to read, all right? Our first passage says, Tammy went outside. She put on her jacket with a hood and took her umbrella. Why? Right? Our second passage says, my grandma bought chocolate chips, flour, and eggs. What is she going to do? All right, hit pause. Decide which passage you're going to answer. All right, hit pause now. All right, so let's look at the answers that I have. All right, my first passage, if that's the one you did, I said it was raining, right? It makes sense. If you go outside and you have a jacket with a hood and an umbrella, it's probably raining, right? Our second passage, if you did that one, I have she was going to make cookies, right? Maybe you have something different because your prior knowledge is different, right? Maybe you said she's going to make chocolate chip pancakes, All right. That would be just fine as long as you can justify your answer. All right. So let's look at our next set. Our first passage says, Weston fell again. He was wearing his helmet and he landed in the grass, so he wasn't hurt. He got back up and watched his sister glide by him. He knew he could do it if he kept trying. What was he trying to do? All right. And our second passage says, a boy is wearing a party hat. He is opening presents. What is today? Right? All right. Hit pause and decide how you're going to answer those passages. What is your inference? All right. Hit pause now. All right. So let's look at the answers that I have. All right. So my first passage, I said he was trying to skateboard. Right? The clues I had for that was he had a helmet on and he fell in the grass, right? And his sister glided by him, right? Maybe you said he was roller skating or rollerblading, right? That makes sense and that's acceptable. You wouldn't say that he was ice skating because him landing in the grass doesn't make sense. And our second passage, my answer that I have is it's his birthday, right? It makes sense because he's opening presents and he has a party hat. If he wasn't wearing a party hat, maybe it would have been Christmas, right? All right, so let's look at our last set. Our first passage says, you look out your window, you see your friends outside all wearing costumes and carrying bags. What day is it? All right, and our second passage says, everyone was wearing red and pink. All of Lily's classmates were carrying little cards. What day is it? Right? Hit pause and decide how you're going to answer those ones with your inference. Okay, hit pause now. All right, so let's look at the answers that I have. All right, the first passage I have, it's Halloween. All right, the clues for me were costumes and carrying bags. When you put those two things together, it usually means Halloween. Right? And for our second passage, I had the answer of it's Valentine's Day, right? And the clues that I had were the colors red and pink and little cards, right? Maybe you haven't had a Valentine's Day party in your classroom in a while, but if you think back to when you were little, those are the things that were common, right? You had red and pink were your colors and everyone had Valentine's cards, right? All right, so I have one more thing for practice, all right? This one is going to be a little bit more fun, and maybe you'll understand it a little better, all right? What I want you to do is match the passage to the emoji, all right? So let's look at it. Here is our first passage, and it says, Sandra's little sister is sick. She was up all night crying. They share a room. What emoji did she text her friend, right? Our second passage says Elijah was wanting to go to his friends after school. His mom told him he had to stay home and clean his room. What emoji did he text his friend? And our last one. Jack just got a brand new shirt that he thinks is super cool. What emoji did he text to his friend? All right. So your emoji options are the crying emoji, the sunglasses emoji, and the sleeping emoji, right? So hit pause, reread your passages if you need to, and then decide which emoji you would send to someone if that happened to you. All right, hit pause now. All right, so let's look at our answers. All right, our first passage, Sandra's little sister is sick. She was up all night crying. They share a room. So I think she sent her friend the sleeping emoji, right? Because if you were in a room with someone who was crying all night, you probably wouldn't sleep. So you would be tired, right? Our second passage, Elijah was wanting to go to his friends after school. His mom told him he had to stay home and clean his room. I think he would have sent the crying emoji, right? He would have probably been upset and let his friend know that he was upset, that he couldn't go. And our last one, Jack just got a brand new shirt that he thinks is super cool. I think he sent the sunglass emoji, right? It's our last choice, so process of elimination, but also that's like our cool emoji, right? There you are. All right. Hopefully you got those same answers, right? Maybe you struggled with this, and that's okay, because this is trying to link our passage with kind of a feeling, right? How would you feel and what would you send that tells that feeling, right? All right, so I want to challenge you. I want you to make your own inference game at home, all right? So your inference game that I want you to make, right? I want you to put together 3 clues to have someone infer an idea, all right? You can write them down or you can use objects, all right? As an example, for writing down, I have lab coat, stethoscope, and scalpel, right? That's one set of clues, all right? My second set of clues, just as an idea, is flashlight, gun, badge, right? When I think about the first set of clues, lab coat, stethoscope, and scalpel, I think in my head, maybe you do too, is doctor or surgeon, right? That's how you want to do your inference game. Give the clues and decide what your answer is going to be. And hopefully who you're giving it to gets your answer, right? So our second example, flashlight, gun, and badge, I have police, security officer, or a sheriff, right? Maybe you got something else, right? That's for writing down your clues. As an example of using objects, maybe you have them at home, right? I have marshmallows, and then I have graham crackers and chocolate, right? If I went around the house and grabbed things thinking, okay, these 3 things are going to tell me something, right? What do these 3 things tell you, right? It tells me s'mores, right? All right, so think about your game, right? Think about how you're going to make your inference game, right? And share it with your family or your friends, whoever is at home with you, right? So let's wrap up, all right? Today we learned what an inference is, how to make an inference and what steps are involved. And then we also learned how we use inferences to help us determine the unwritten meanings in a text, right? Think back to our pancakes for breakfast, right? There wasn't anything written for a story. We had the recipe written, but that doesn't tell us the story, right? We had to infer what was happening, right? So, thank you for joining me. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day. If you want to keep watching, I have some bonus practice ready. All right? All right, so bonus practice, just some more to practice your inferencing skills, right? I have 4 passages with questions afterward, just like we did for you, right? When we practiced it together. All right, so you can choose to do all of them. You can choose to just do one of them. All right, so our first passage, right? The passage reads, Craig's fingers and toes were officially numb. He decided it was time to go inside. He leaned the sled against the garage and headed back inside. The moment he opened the door, a sweet aroma filled his nostrils. It's ready, called Mom. The steaming mug was waiting for him on the kitchen table. He took off his hat, gloves, and boots and hurried over to warm his hands on the mug. This is my favorite part of winter, he whispered as he took a sip. All right, if you want to hit pause to reread that, go ahead and do it. Now make an inference using that passage, all right? The first part, why were Craig's fingers and toes numb? What did Mom get ready for Craig, all right? And then, how do you think Craig feels about his mom in this scenario? And how do you know? And last, decide on one more clue that could help the reader understand what was happening. All right. Passage number 2 reads, "Holly, it's time to turn off your lamp," my mom called. "Please, just one more minute," I begged. "You've already asked for one more minute about 20 times," she retorted. "Okay," I grumbled. I couldn't wait to see what was going to happen next, so I snuggled deep in my covers and continued on. Just then, I heard my mom's footsteps. "Uh-oh," I sighed. One hand folded over the top corner of the page while the other hand reached to turn off the lamp. Phew! Just in time. Right? Go ahead and hit pause, reread that one. All right, so make an inference about that passage. First, why didn't Holly want to go turn off her lamp? What did she want to do instead? All right. What can you tell about Holly by reading the passage? How do you know? And last, decide on one more clue that could help the reader understand what was happening. All right. Passage number 3. It reads, "The whole family got settled on the porch and gazed at the horizon. Brilliant reds, oranges, and pinks filled the sky. This was surely our favorite part of the day." "It's slipping away," said Jenny. The colors shifted as the sky darkened. The lights from the city became more and more bright. Just then, the last sliver of light sank into the horizon. It was time for bed. All right, go ahead and hit pause, reread that one. Now, make an inference about that passage. Answer these questions. What time of day is this scenario? What was this family doing? Jenny says, "It's slipping away." What is she referring to, and how do you know? Last, decide on one more clue that could help the reader understand what was happening. Right? And our last passage, passage number 4, reads, "It wouldn't have been so treacherous if I didn't have a 25-pound bag hanging off my shoulder. Panting, sweat dripping down the sides of my face as I raced through the terminal. Please, please, please make it," I mumbled to myself. As I approached the gate, I immediately noticed that the door to the jetway was closed. Staring out the window, I stomped my foot, sighed deeply, and let out a few grunts. I can't believe I missed it. All right, go ahead and hit pause, reread that one. Now, make an inference about that passage. Answer these questions. Where was this character? What was happening in the passage? Right? How does this character feel at the end of the scenario, and how do you know? And last, decide on one more clue that could help the reader understand what was happening. All right? Hopefully you were able to get some extra practice with that, right? Maybe you can practice some more with some things you have at home, all right? Anyway, this is the end of our entire lesson. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.